When I was discussing ethical issues in educational research, I mentioned the categorical imperative. And in simple terms, that means that you should do to other people what you would like them to do to you, that you should be willing to see what you apply to some people applied to all people. And I say that I would like to see that extended to the selection of theory, to the way that we do the research. In particular, I would like any theory that I apply to be a kind of theory I'd be prepared for other people to apply to me. Let me give you an example of a theory that I didn't like to have applied to me. I used to have a colleague, and he's had a theory that people didn't like change. More than that, he said, people don't like change because they're afraid of it. The reason that policymakers propose changes, the reason those changes don't get implemented properly is because the people who have to implement them are afraid of change. Now, frankly, I'm not afraid of change. I quite like change. In every day, I like a change in the weather. I like to take a different route to work each day. I like to vary things around a little bit. And I've worked in many schools where there's been change on the horizon. There's been a new head teacher coming or some change in the school. And I've always thought, well, change may be awkward, change may be difficult. I quite like change though, so long as the change that's difficult for me is also difficult for the other people who I don't think are doing such a very good job. So I'm not afraid of change. But when my colleague saw that I resisted a change, he thought I was afraid of it. He's telling me what I was thinking. What I was actually thinking was the change he was proposing was not particularly good. It wouldn't produce the effects that I wanted to see. I don't think it would have produced the effects that he wanted to see. So that what I don't like is theories that tell me what I think. So there you are, theories that tell me what I think. I don't like them. That's why I don't like Freud very much. I don't like Freud telling me that he understands my motivation better than I do, telling me that it's all in my subconscious. I don't think that I have a subconscious in the sense that Freud means it. I mean, obviously, a person has a subconscious. There are things that I know that I'm not permanently and always aware of. I know what my telephone number is, but it's not always in consciousness. I have to recall it. And I think that the point and purpose of being human is that one tries to understand hidden motivations, bring them to the surface. I don't think that there's a whole internal conflict going on between parts of my personality, other parts of my personality. I think that our job is to try and make things conscious. For similar reasons, I don't much like a lot of what Marx had to say. I don't think that I have false consciousness. In fact, I'm not sure what false consciousness is. Consciousness is not false or true. Consciousness just is. So there's just anyone who applies a theory that tells me what I've got to be thinking, that I resist. And for that reason, I try not to apply that kind of theory to other people. Now, thinking about that not in a negative side, I've rather said that's rather negative side, but think about what that means to how I feel, how you feel. I believe that I make choices. It feels as though I'm making choices. So I'm going to make a choice between two possibilities. I'm going to study abroad, I'm going to study at home in my own country. I'm going to study sciences, I'm going to study arts. I'm going to stay on in school, I'm going to leave school. It feels to me as though I'm making a real choice. And if I'm making a real choice, it's possible it could turn out either way. I could choose to study sciences, or I could choose to study arts. I could choose to study in my own country. I could choose to study abroad. Either of those things, and now a good theory then, to me, ought to leave me the freedom of choice and should explain both things. If I choose to stay in my own country, it should explain that, and if I choose to go abroad, it should explain that too. There should be a theory that explains the possibilities but takes my decision seriously. It shouldn't say you're pushed into studying abroad by the push factors and pull factors. I don't want to be treated as if I'm a piece of wood floating on a stream that goes wherever the stream takes me. I think I'm making real choices, and I want that reflected in theory. And so I'm looking for theories that don't tell me what individuals will do, because telling individuals what they will do, I don't like that being applied to me. But I do believe that I'm looking for theories that explain that some people go this way and some people go that way, and that they're working for the benefit of those people making those choices. That means I've just ruled out an awful lot of descriptions of decisions and descriptions of choices that people make that are common in educational research. A person chooses to stay on school or drop out. Notice the word drop out, it's a derogatory negative term, and it says the person who drops out of school is doing the wrong thing. Well, I think they're doing the wrong thing. I'm a teacher, I think people should be like me, I think they should stay on in school and become professionals. If they're dropping out, I think they're doing the wrong thing, but I've never met anybody who dropped out of school thinking they were doing the wrong thing. I've seen people dropping out of school because they'd got a good job lined up. They knew what they wanted to do with their lives. I've seen people drop out of school because they didn't like the atmosphere in the school and they wanted to study in a college. I've seen people dropping out for all sorts of reasons, but I've never seen anybody who didn't have a good explanation of why they were dropping out. And so I think that when I'm providing theories, looking for theories that explain those sorts of choices, I need to find theories that respect their personal choices. And that includes when I'm asking people questions, they have the right to lie. I have the right to lie. I have the right to give silly answers to silly questions. If I get a questionnaire from my bank that says, how likely, on the basis of your last visit to our website, are you to recommend this bank to your friends or relatives? I always say, not at all likely. I don't recommend banks to my friends and relatives. I'm not a registered advisor on financial issues. If they ask a silly question, they deserve a silly answer. And the people that you ask, the people you address, the people you're expecting to respond, sometimes will lie to you. They may not lie consciously. They may be looking for an answer that they think is socially acceptable. We've given you a brand new curriculum. You've chosen to adopt it. You've chosen to ignore it. Why have you chosen to ignore this wonderful new curriculum that we've put forward? Well, what am I going to say? We didn't have enough money. We didn't have enough time. We weren't trained. Those are the kinds of answers that are kind of acceptable. I'm not going to say I'm too stupid to understand the new curriculum, and I'm certainly not going to say I didn't implement this curriculum because it was written by idiots and it wouldn't work anyway. I'm going to find some slightly softer, milder way, but it is, in essence, it's a lie. It's giving a socially acceptable response to the question. And you need to be taking that into account when you're thinking about your theory as well. So there's a whole lot of areas where we need to respect the ability of other people to make choices. And it should affect how we put that into theory. And I think this goes way back. Before we become educational researchers, before we get anywhere near doing educational research and choosing educational theories, we've developed an understanding, we've developed a personal understanding of how human beings work. I don't know whether when you were 10 or 11, you would go up to people in the playground and say to them, I bet I know what you're going to say next. And almost certainly, because it's a normal human reaction when somebody tells you they know what you're going to do next, you say, I bet you can't. And you say, well, here I've got written in a piece of paper in my pocket. Well, I haven't written it on a piece of paper in my pocket. I've made a video. But you can almost guarantee that when you predict someone is going to do something, well, they may do it in the end, but they'll bristle a bit. They don't like to be too predictable. They don't want to be understood too quickly. So you need to be thinking about these things when you're shaping the way you do research. And the way you do research will be based upon that substratum, that underlying tendency that you've got to think of people in a particular way. And the way I want to think about people is the people I'm looking at in my theories are like me. They won't like to be told this is a good thing, you're stupid for doing otherwise. They won't want to be told what they're thinking, and they will be wanting you to take their choices seriously so that you're theorising real choices. And that ought to be the starting point of how you choose theories, but also how you set your questions, how you develop your research questions. What is it that you want to know at the end of your research study that you don't know now? You want to go out and find out how people make choices, what influences them, how did they encounter that choice, how did they think about that choice. And you want to be asking yourself not just what does it say in the textbooks, but what kind of explanation, if I was making that choice, what kind of explanation of my behaviour would I find satisfactory? A year from now, 2 years from now, 3 years from now, whenever your research project ends, you want to produce an answer. And the answer should be one that if it was another researcher studying your decisions, you would be content for them to have framed it in this way. And for me, that means it's got to say, well, it's a real choice. Someone might go one way, might go the other way, but it's a choice that's made on the basis of reasonable reflection on the part of the person. And those theories are relatively few and far between. Most of the research work that we're doing is based on simple models of pushing or pulling. We're treating people, for the most part, in most of our theory, as if they were pieces of wood or lumps of stone that are pushed around without reference to what's going on in their heads. It's a superficial explanation. I did very well at school, thank you very much, because my parents were aspiring, they gave me support at home and so on. Is that an explanation that I'm satisfied with? Well, it's a partial explanation, but I think I did well at school because I worked hard. So I want that my thinking taken into account when somebody explains success in school, social mobility, or whatever it is. I want the individual's freedom of choice to be reflected in the theory. And that's what I'm saying to you. This question of the categorical imperative, think about your research in those terms. Think about your research is, would you be satisfied? The explanation you're striving towards, if you're successful, would you be satisfied if that same explanation was applied to you? If it was applied to everybody, including you? And that, I think, is where ethical considerations run into the general everyday conduct of research in a way that's not necessarily reflected in some of the discussions of ethical issues that we've seen in documents and theses that are prepared by students who have a section that has to address those things that are thought of as standard in ethical considerations. So after those general considerations of choosing theories that can be applied to anybody, including the researcher, my only advice about formulating research questions would be to keep them simple. Keep them one simple sentence, perhaps one colon and a bit of explanation, but keep them simple. And there are two reasons for that. One is that you want to be able to say something in the future. You're looking forward to the future when you've got an answer to that question. And if it's a simple question, you'll know whether you've got a simple. But it also stops you asking compound questions where there's too much implied and assumed inside the question itself. I mean, I don't blame anyone for doing this when the professionals who organise conferences are giving them titles that imply so many different answers to research questions. I've just been to a conference. And that was the title of the conference, Mobilising Knowledge, Partnerships and Innovations for Sustainable Development Through Education and Training. And look how many assumptions are smuggled in there. Mobilising knowledge. I have no idea how you mobilise knowledge, but if you mobilise knowledge for sustainable development, does knowledge promote sustainable development? I don't see any evidence of that. If you mobilise partnerships, do partnerships promote sustainable development? I'm not sure that I see any evidence of that. Does mobilising innovations promote, again, the links between mobilising these things and sustainable development is tenuous, to say the least. And then through education, is education going to help in mobilising knowledge? Hopefully it would, but have we got any evidence of that? Does education mobilise partnerships? Don't see great evidence of that. And so there's a whole bunch of assumptions built into this statement. It's not a question, I know it's not a question, but if you make your questions complicated, there's the risk that you're hiding in them hidden assumptions, hiding in them things that you don't know, but you may miss asking those questions because you've been carried away by the assumption that education and training is the answer for sustainable development, and so you won't question it. And you always need, in research questions, to be allowing yourself space to question the assumptions that underlie your findings. Always, research is cutting away the ground under your own feet so that if you are standing on something firm, you have some idea of how firm it is. When I was at school, we used to have a type of test. And they would give us two statements, statement A and statement B. Could be anything. Knowledge promotes sustainable development. Education promotes knowledge. Whatever statement they might be, two statements, and you had to say, is A true or is A false? Is A true, or is B true, or is B false? And then if both of them are true, is B the reason for A? Does B explain it? So the range of different possibilities, but always that question, if they're both true, they can both be true but have no connection, but if they're true, does B explain A? And with long and complicated questions, that issue arises again of, does the second part actually connect with the first part? So keep your research questions simple. One simple research question, and that will enable you to produce a direct, clear research program that produces a simple answer to why children drop out of school, why some teaching methods are better than others, why some educational methods are not being adopted in schools. A simple question rather than a multiple question that assumes too much.